when this is back in 94, my grandfather bought my dad, but by extension, me, a computer.
Okay.
I was the one that used it all the time. And this is Windows 3.11, 486 66 megahertz processor, very, arcane computer compared to what you have today. Love that thing. I mean, I was on that thing all the time. My mom named it, actually. I forget what she called my computer, but she had it like, that's your girlfriend. Like, doing this, spending time with the computer all the time. And then construction was kind of the thing I had to be involved with, not the thing I wanted to be involved with as a kid. Yeah. So I'm 11 years old. Computer, that was my life. That's what I wanted to do. And my dad's like, no, we're a construction company and you will be involved in this. So during the summer, I'm working with him doing stuff. And I was like, I'd much rather be home doing my thing. Yeah. And for me, business was the thing I wanted to do, not so much this. I mean, I enjoy the process of business. I love the marketing aspect of it. I love, everything about business is really exciting. And so when you're just a laborer working on, trim carpentry, things like that, it was, I mean, obviously things you could do and was engaging, but it was just
wasn't what you were
not what I wanted to do at all. Yeah. So fast forward, I start, eBay comes around like 96, 97. And I start selling computer parts because I needed to upgrade my old computer. So I'm buying computer parts wholesale, finding good deals, and realize I have this friend. He's like, oh, you can go call this distributor up and you can find parts that are a lot cheaper there. Okay. So from there, I realized, oh, there's a market for this. I can go open a distributor account, buy one hard drive for my computer, sell 2 others to other people. This is the business side of me kicking in, right? Yeah. So I'm selling all of these computer parts, and then next thing I know, I'm selling hundreds of thousands of dollars of stuff on eBay. And this is all in my bedroom. And my dad is what's going on in here, son? UPS truck guy knows me by name, like what's happening. And he's starting to look at the numbers, and he just saw dollar signs. He was like, whoa, this is cool. In fact, I even had an offer for like $400,000 for somebody to buy my business. And I was like 15 years old.
That's not what I was doing at 15.
Hey, but what
that's okay.
It still carries over. Like, I mean, maybe I shouldn't have been doing that.
No,
but anyway,
I mean, it sounds nice.
So, but I still have this construction connection with my dad. He'd be doing a project, and it was like, you're coming to work with me today. You go do your stuff in the evening. Yeah. And so I'm like doing stuff I didn't want to do. So then that branches off into me starting a little bit more legitimate business of like, okay, I'm gonna do something less than just eBay. I mean, it's gonna be something really more significant than eBay. So then I started Pro Notebooks, this company where I was buying laptop parts from Taiwan, building these computers in my basement, and then love system building and setting all these things out. So I have this like, UPS thing, people honking, stuff coming and going all the time, and have this kind of business. So my dad thinks this is just pure genius. He doesn't even know what's going on, but he's my fan. He's just like, whatever he's doing. I don't even know what you're doing, but it's super cool. Yeah, super cool. Like he would ask me questions like, can you, like, how does the computer actually work? Yeah, for sure. And I would try breaking it down to the best of what I knew about it. And he would like, but how does it actually work? Yeah. And I'm like,
I'm your dad in this example.
You're like, yeah, there's zeros and ones. Anyway, we don't get lost in that whole part of the story. So then, but my dad's such a big fan of mine. So the place that he works at, he's hawking like this boy genius at home of what I'm doing. And he's telling his boss that.
That's cool.
This works up to the chain to the owner of this business, and who loops me into this, like, it's a pretty, like, a multi-million-dollar company with maybe they had 300 employees.
Wow.
And at that point, he said, they're having, and the president of this company, he realized he just hated technology and thought it was all too complex. Yep. The people in IT were fools. He needed somebody to run all this. Yeah. So I think I was 19, and my dad says, my son can do this for you. He can run your IT stuff. He'll clean this all up. He can do, he'll make this so much easier for you. Somehow or another, I land that position running an IT department in this there's 45 people underneath me in an IT department.
That's insane.
I never managed a single person before in my life. And so I'm now have a team of 45 people. 5 of them quit just because I'm there.
Yeah. Well, I'm sure. Yeah. You're like 19 and they've been there for a long time. Exactly, they're like, I'm going to run the department
100%,
at some point.
Where did this kid come from? So some of them just couldn't stomach it. But over the next 3 years, that was my dream job. Like, I loved it. Every part about it. I learned so much.
That's cool.
I grew from like all of the traps that I was oblivious to. I learned about, obviously I had a lot of experience in coding just from building my e-commerce business before, but a whole nother level being around people that knew a lot more than I did about it. In fact, one of the engineers was like, I've been coding since you were in diapers.
Yeah, probably true. Yeah, that's
true. Yeah. It's like, it wasn't that far after diapers when I started coding either, but I was 11. But anyway, all of that kind of stuff just translated into this dream job. And then we had a family kind of crisis that really where my dad and mom really felt like we needed to move, and it was urgent, and like there was, and it just uprooted my whole job because I was 21 still. Everything was connection to the family. Our family's very strong that way. Like what we were going to do together, we're going to do it.
Yeah.
And so it was like, and I had big plans for this entity. We grew from, just kind of the experience was we had 3,500 customers as a product, a software product that these customers were using that we had delivered as well. There was a whole data center, all of this like server room and air conditioners and, this multi-million-dollar kind of operation that was really cool. So I loved it. And then I had big plans of like branching it off and growing it. And so all of this stuff's in my head, and it just kind of got smashed apart in a part of a month. And then I handed it off to my second basically and just said, I didn't think he could handle it, but I was like, you take it and run with it. Ended up, somebody else bought that part of the business out, and it just ended up being something else. Anyway, all of those experiences combined kind of turned into invaluable life lessons and a lot of like dreams as well. Like later on, I'm like, oh, I would, wish I could do this or, do that some again. Of that, like do it again kind of thing, right? So going from that, I went to, anyway, I'm rambling on.
It's okay. It's like a life story. I like it.
Anyway, it is a life story. It's been a life story. Yeah. So it went to, then I had the appetite for that bad. Like I wanted to build a product, and I had lined up what I wanted to do. It wasn't ConGenius at that point. It was in the line of this kind of network operations kind of stuff, firewalls and security. And
sounds really boring. Sorry.
Very boring.
It sounds so boring.
Particularly for our audience. So I worked on that for several years and started realizing how hard it is to do things alone as well, because at that point I didn't have a team anymore. That was a perk that came along with the position I had, where there was people that I could talk to and leverage, and I just became the person that could tee things up. Did a lot of things solo, so I had this illusion that I could do a lot more than I could. And I think one of the biggest things I learned as a part of that too was that it's very hard to even have the motivation to do big things on your own.
Sure.
Because it's, you kind of, somewhere along the line you get discouraged, you run up against something, or something that becomes difficult to do, or something you don't enjoy doing that you have to do, and it's just kind of, it's very hard.
You don't have another perspective. You don't have,
it's good.
The encouragement,
big part of that, the encouragement, and also that like accountability as well, because sometimes it just requires the extra level of push, and then the other thing about it is you can get distracted somewhere. Like for me, that precision, the level of attention to detail can be kind of distracting when you have to do something very big, because it's fun for me to do that kind of thing. And it can be...
It takes your time sometimes.
It takes a lot of time to get some things right. And sometimes when there's something else that just needs to get done, it's more alluring to just go after something and making it pretty.
Yeah, makes sense.
So all that said, then it went to, still keeping this connection to the family business, but having that appetite for doing software and building servers and doing products like that, and having some fun gigs along the way and kind of freelancing, and then getting to the point of ConGenius over like starting a remodel business, which I didn't want to do. I got good at it, but I don't love doing that part about the business. I mean, really the solution side of things is what the passion for me is. Yeah. And so ConGenius is really that melding together of those early experiences in e-commerce and software, where I really enjoy making, taking complexity, reducing it down to something where you can preserve the solution that solves that complexity, but makes it understandable and easy, and you kind of break that complexity down to something that's simple.
Simple, yeah.
And I think that's, it's not, I guess the point being in all of the story, kind of the theme in that is that I had a lot of experiences that I didn't choose, and I would have totally gone a different path, but I never would have got to this point without some of that, without the things I didn't choose, or without those hard things, or without those lessons. And I think there's a big trend in our society as well, like do the things you love to do. And I think sometimes you lose out on some of that. Yeah. If you're just doing the thing you're passionate about doing, like the things that I'm passionate about doing today, I wouldn't have been passionate about 20 years ago.
Yeah. Sometimes you have to just start and learn what you're passionate about too.
Yeah. Like, it's so good. No. I mean, who at 18 years old
no one
goes to college and knows what they're going to want to do with their life.
Unless you're like, I've always wanted to be a doctor or something like that. Like there's few people, but yeah.
You know anybody that's just had it all sorted out since they're like 5 years old? I mean, like they're just like, I want to be an engineer. I want to build bridges. I'm going to do this like a George Bailey type.
No, I don't think I know a single person.
Yeah.
And most people that I know graduating from college now, like my little sister and things like that, they still don't know what they want to do. But the entire mission of college is find your purpose, find your place. That's what our mission statement at the college I went to was. But I'm like, well, I don't know what that means because I don't have
what am I doing here? Yeah.
I haven't done anything. How do you know?
Right.
It's funny.
Yeah, without doing it.
Yeah.
And I think that's one of the real privileges of actually being in a kind of, my dad would take anything on. Like he didn't know what he couldn't do. I mean, he tells stories of, the first time he would do something is when he did it professionally.
Right.
Like somebody would say, do you do that? And he'd say, he believed in himself enough to be like, yeah, we'll do that. How hard could it be?
He didn't even have YouTube to help.
No, he didn't.
Right?
No YouTube. Yeah. Not even books. Like you just trial and error.
Wow. Yeah.
I mean, yeah, it's radically different now.
Probably lost some money on those jobs.
Wow. Yeah. There were a few ones that was like, wow. I mean, but you learn from those moments. Yeah. I think we've talked about finishing, like my experiences in learning how to finish. We were just kind of over the holidays talking as a family about like spraying, and my little brother's really, really good at it.
Okay.
He's what would he be now? He's 29. No, he's 27 years old and a master finisher.
Wow.
At 27.
That's cool.
He's just spraying.
Just done it a lot.
Yeah, he's done a ton of spraying, high-end finishes, cabinetry, and everything else. And
that's cool.
And then he was just talking about like some of these experiences where he had fisheye and something, couldn't figure it out. Why is this doing it? It's not supposed to be doing this. And then discovering what it was, and then and just trial and error, figuring things out, talking to people that were better at it or
Makes
whatever.
Sense. Having mentors, learning from other people. Yeah.
And then he evolved into something. I mean, he wouldn't set out to do that at all.
Yeah, that's cool. And now he loves it probably because he's really good at it.
Very good at it.
Yeah.
You're really good at volleyball.
Yeah. So, I was. Now I'm washed up and old. But I was an All-American. Yes, that's true. But
yeah, I mean, but you still have a passion for something because you were good at it.
now it's
my guess is you probably are still very good.
I'm still competitive. Yeah.
Still competitive. Yeah.
In my old lady volleyball league. Yeah.
Yeah. There you go. You win most of your games.
Most.
See?
Yeah, it's true.
I had to venture an opinion.
Yeah, it takes a team.
Yeah. So going into 2024.
Yeah.
I don't even know where I was going with that story.
That's cool though. It's a cool backstory.
Yeah, it is. Yeah.
It's the journey of how it's the journey. It's kind of the seize the opportunity.
Yeah.
I think is what I heard from it, of like the opportunities that you didn't even know were coming. Mm-hmm. You said yes to some and you learned a lot. You learned what you were passionate about. You grew in them even when you weren't prepared to do them. So.
Yeah. And even in the moments of adversity where I hated certain experiences, but then later reflecting back on it, I could just say, wow, those are the best things that ever happened to me.
Yeah. It's cool.
You're just miserable at the time. You want to.
But I think it's perspective too. It's like, what are you looking for in it? Because if you're looking for negative things, you will see negative things. If you're looking for positive things and the things that you're growing in, you will see positive things. That's just true.
Yeah. One of the interesting moments I had was like, this like miserable experiences as well is kind of developing the mindset of, if I'm going to be a garbage man, I'm going to have fun being that. Whatever it is I'm going to do it 100%. I'm going to be creative. I'm going to learn things along the way and be the best I could possibly be at it. Yeah. If you have that mindset, and it was kind of a little bit cliche, right?
Yeah.
Just be the best you could be.
Yeah.
But I think if you have that mindset, who knows what problems you can actually unpack and solve along the way. And when you really just go all in, as opposed to just like, well, I have to do this.
Yeah. I think though, that's a lot of our audience, right? I mean, they are going all in, know, like, I mean, if you're starting your own business, if you're doing your own thing, if you're going out on your own, like you have to have some of that belief, know, and we've talked about the entrepreneurship side of construction businesses and things like that. And you're passionate about business, you're an entrepreneur, and I think our audience shares that too.
Yeah.
It may not have been a tech business and selling computer parts.
Yeah. We've talked before on the podcast about some of the motivations behind why you go out on your own. I think there's an element of freedom of time, right? I think that's maybe the primary motivation. You want to be your own boss. You want to be able to choose your own destiny, as opposed to somebody else controlling that aspect of your life, saying 9 to 5, you will be here, you will do what we tell you to do, and you have this many days of vacation time. That's
true.
Versus saying, you know what, I want to go take a month off, I can do that, I can work. You have unlimited opportunity either direction.
Right.
And I think, as start of a new year, we like to reflect on what do we want to do better, what do we want to, like, there's something innate about that.
It's weird, but also, it's so
like,
true.
It's a new beginning. Yep. It's an opportunity to do better than we did last year. And so maybe we talk about like New Year's resolutions in one sense, but then there's also an element of just being like, we want to make those improvements. We want to be able to start off with a clean slate, not have the past weigh us down.
Yeah, it's true.
I think that's maybe a big part about it.
Yeah, I think it is too.
Yeah,
that's right.
Where it's like, okay, we can do better, and we know we will.
Yeah.
I was looking at TickTick, our task management app that we both use. Great app. Yeah. Highly recommended.
Talked about it on here.
We don't get any money for people to sign up. It's just great.
Yeah.
But they do at the end of the year, they'll show like your year in review. I don't know if they send that to you yet, but anyway, they'll do like 2023, and they'll show like tasks completed over the course of the year.
That's cool.
Like I completed like 3,600 tasks over the course of 2023.
Insane. You track more tasks than I do.
Yeah, well, that's true. You do a lot of things. It's not like you weren't busy. Yeah. You were just not checking things off. And January was my most productive month of the year from a task standpoint. And then at the end of the year, December was the least productive mode from a task standpoint. But then I started thinking about it. A big part of it was almost like, okay, I'm not going to spend as much time tracking things, planning things, doing things. Like it's all about gearing up for a new year.
True.
And so it was interesting.
You change your mental state.
It showed in the data.
Yeah. That's cool. That's interesting.
Yeah.
It's a cool report.
It really was. Yeah. And some of the other things were about like certain days of the week, even like Mondays can be a very productive day from a task standpoint, particularly when you wind down the week.
Yeah.
But we had a theme for the podcast today, and I just wondered. I just took it a totally different direction.
No, it's good. We want to talk about estimating today, but I think one of the we have talked about it before. We can't get away from it because it's so important.
It's so important, and it's a big reason why we exist too.
Well, for sure. Yeah, we do have an estimating app, so. But that's not the only reason we're talking about it. We just think it's vital to successful businesses. It says approximately 41% of the construction workforce, including many people in management roles, will retire by the year 2030.
So what I'm reading is opportunity abounds.
Oh, a ton.
Yeah. If you're really, if that many seasoned pros are exiting the space, somebody's got to take the mantle.
Yeah, and I think what we're trying to do is be like, here's some tips and some tools of how you can actually succeed and win. And
my dad is probably one of those people. He's 67 years old, and so and he's
exactly who they're talking about.
Yeah, exactly. Still manages a construction business, but in the next 8 years, he won't be doing that anymore.
Yeah,
he will be retired doing something else. And it's really hard for him to hand that off to somebody else. As gifted and talented as he is,
sell a construction business.
No, I don't think he can sell that.
Yeah.
It's so much about him.
Yeah,
like people don't hire his business; they hire him.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. So we want to talk about estimating.
Okay. Here I go.
Yeah, you're wondering
following every rabbit trail I possibly can. Hope it's entertaining. If nothing else.
I think one question just to kick off, and I know we've talked about this in multiple episodes. We've talked about ballparking bids. We've talked about what it takes to estimate accurately. But why do you think that people in the space struggle with actually estimating accurately? In general, that's a big question. There's probably a lot of reasons, but maybe break it down for us a little bit.
Yeah, from my experience, I think the things that are really hard to quantify or do accurately or do well, like it's sometimes we procrastinate. Like if something that I don't really know how to solve. I don't know if you identify with this either, but where you're saying, man, I don't have a great solution to that, so I'm just going to kick the can on that one. There's more important things to do. And I think estimating kind of falls in that bucket sometimes.
Yeah, probably so.
Where it becomes like, well, I know that guy needs an estimate, but I don't love doing it. It's hard to really get it right. What do I need a bid for that? And so you just like, well, I'll do that later.
Yeah.
And then it becomes more urgent. And then it's kind of the squeaky wheel gets the grease sometimes.
Sure.
I've requested in the last 3 months, I needed some EIFS repairs to my exterior of my home, so like stucco.
Yeah.
So I had 3 referrals from somebody that does inspections and said, hey, check these guys out. Long story short, all 3 people came out. I haven't got a single bid besides one was a text message from somebody just like, hey, it's about $4,000. And didn't really define how they're going to do it, with what materials, what quality.
Yeah.
I'm not accepting that bid because I have no idea what he's actually doing.
Right.
And so I think
it's going to end up being, or
right. And he was like, well, how are we solving? Do we want to match what's there existing? I'm like, well, I want it to look good. I'm like, I don't want to, he just almost seemed like, can we throw it together for about $4,000? And I was thinking, well, maybe I've mentioned this before, but I think that the point being though, maybe that's an example of where people just really just feel like the pressure of performing work, getting stuff done, and then there's the estimating problem. And so we talked about this in like prior to the show. A big part about is really being able to estimate is repeating things accurately. And that involves having a catalog of things where you really study the components that you actually, the components of your work.
Yeah.
Like your hourly wage, what types of products do you actually do? What's involved with doing that? Where you actually learn over time. And some of the most successful businesses are ones where they've simplified it down to a very specific set of products where they understand their cost, they understand their margin markup, they know how to scale it. And if you're a remodeling contractor or a handyman or something, that's very hard to do because you do so many things.
It's so broad. You can't actually specialize in anything. So there's, millions of products you could use or materials.
And it changes every time. So you feel like, what's the point behind that?
Totally.
So I think one of the challenges to our audience, maybe we started using more allowances to help with this. And I know it's a suggested kind of flow, and even in our app is letting people know, well, let's not try to define everything up front because you can't.
Right.
Use some allowances so you can actually create a reliable source of truth, and you have some detailed breakdown. And I think the other thing is you get burnt in this process as well. It's something that kind of prevents people from really putting the work into it. It's like, well, it's not going to matter anyway.
Right.
So let's throw enough money at it where it can kind of cover for the mistake. And I have several friends that do that. Like, well, the material's about $17,000 based off of their material list. I probably missed a few things, so I'll add another 20-30% on there to cover for my mistakes. And labor, I have no idea, so let's make that another 20 grand there too. So it's about 40,000. Let's add some margin onto that, make it 45. And they lose money because they just don't know what's broken down, and the customer can really take advantage of them without knowing it.
Yeah, because then they're like, well, that's probably included in the cost, but really you don't know.
Because it's never been broken down because they don't want to give that level of insight to their customer either, because that would be vulnerable, because now they're going to be holding them to something where they didn't really actually factor that in necessarily.
Yeah.
So it just sort of snowballs out of control. And I think that's back to the original question. If you have a good motivation for why you want to do something, it makes it a lot easier to do it.
Yeah. It's interesting. You kind of mentioned the whole job costing side of things, knowing what things cost. And I know we've hit on that before, but I was just even thinking earlier today, as we were kind of thinking into this episode, I'm like, if there's not a system or a way to track your material costs or your labor rates or your equipment rental rates or your subcontractor rates, how are you ever going to actually tackle this big question of how to estimate accurately? Because there's got to be a manageable way to keep track of those costs. Some people use Excel spreadsheets that can formulas break in 2 seconds if you accidentally enter something wrong. You have to be careful to give access to those kinds of things. And so I just was thinking of the difficulty of actually knowing your costs if you don't have a solution for tracking them in the first place. You know?
And it seems very overwhelming, and then you kind of think, what the heck, why even bother with it?
Totally.
Why go through all the pain of doing that, because it's not going to be accurate anyway.
Yeah. Gonna have to look
I noticed, I've mentioned this before on the podcast, but I had a game-changing moment for my business when I actually felt enough pain from this, because I was the guy throwing numbers out there and seeing what would stick. I'm ashamed to say.
No, that's normal.
Well, and I think that's the thing about it, where we're a little self-conscious when you're building and just being like, well, I have to do what I have to do. It's not like you're going to tell other people that that's what you should do, but you're like, well, a little embarrassing, but I'm just throwing a number out there.
Right. Yeah. You're not going to tell anybody.
Yeah. No. Yeah. Right. Yeah. And then I got burnt a few times in a row.
Yeah.
And one of the things that really exacerbated the problem, really made it significantly worse, is when I tried to scale it and I hired the first estimator. And then he was like, how do I replicate this kind of gut feeling? And he started gut feeling. He knew nothing about what he was doing.
Yeah.
A fine salesperson, but a horrible estimator. And so he could sell a job, but he had no idea how to cost it. And suddenly I'm getting 3-4 jobs in a row where we're way under what we should have been bidding for it. Yeah. I'm not blaming him for it. I didn't have a process.
Well, yeah, exactly. Even if you could have a smart, capable person who's like, okay, here's all the materials that are going to go into the job. But if you don't know how much time it's going to take to accomplish it, you don't have the experience side of it, making that replicable. That's impossible to do on your, without experience.
So the game-changing moment came in the business where I felt enough pain and I said, okay, I have to solve this. If I have any shot, I've got to know what's happening. I've got to have some insight, and I need some data here.
Right.
And that was really, seems very obvious, right? If you're listening to this, you'd be like, well, duh. Of course you need data.
Right.
how hard could that be? And then I started realizing it's very hard.
Yeah.
And I think there's a deep sympathy that I have for anybody trying to actually run a business, have any sort of work-life balance, perform work, manage a crew, learn everything you need to know about HR along the way, and manage a customer, and also have the capacity to have some sort of analytical process in the back end.
Right.
And I think you need all of that if you have any kind of shot, but that's, it's a lot to bite off. Do.
Yeah, right.
Yeah. And then it became sort of a number cruncher in the back, and my team is like, what are you doing?
Yeah. Yeah.
It's a lot. And I think that's really, really overwhelming.
Yeah. No, I like that. The sympathy side of that. It's like, I think it comes out in at least the podcast of hey, we want this to be sort of consultative and coaching and, just helpful in the sense of that. And
but sometimes people just need a hug.
But it's rooted in experience. Yeah, exactly. It's hard,
oh man. Sometimes there's solidarity, just being like, it sucks, doesn't it?
Yeah.
You don't want to end there. You don't want to be like, oh, that's, there's nothing to be done. I don't want to drop anybody off there. Just being like, it's all hard, sucks, it's miserable, because otherwise we just talk around the coffee table and just being like, crew sucks. Hard to find good help. So hard to bid accurately. It's impossible.
Mm-hmm.
And
not worth your time.
Yeah. Anything else to talk about?
Yeah. Yeah. No, that's
the end
true.
of the show.
Yeah. Those things might all be true, but let's have some solutions.
But then this kind of goes back to, are we telling ourselves the right story and all of that? Like that can be a thing we run with. I think you mentioned earlier, like if you focus on negativity, you're going to kind of run with that. You can find negativity anywhere as opposed to, maybe I'm a little bit overly optimistic. I think,
You are optimistic. Yeah.
You notice that? Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. 2 years in working together, he's optimistic. Yeah. It's good. It's good though.
And I think there's an element of balance that because we can't overreact to somebody's personality or wanting to be, see the positive in things and just being like, okay, I know you want to see the positive. And I even challenge some people on our team too, of like, they're even more optimistic than I am. They're just, I can have that done in an hour. I'm like, there's just no way.
Yeah. Right.
No,
it's true.
Yeah.
They don't have the estimating skill. Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
Do they know the cost? No, I'm
right.
just kidding.
Right.
No, that's cool. Maybe dive into some of the I guess pointers, if you will, on just like what does it actually take to estimate accurately? Like I know we've talked about knowing your costs, tracking some of those things, not ballparking bids, but I mean bare bones, like where do you even start and what does it take from your perspective, and kind of talk us through that process?
And there's so many different scenarios, right? So we could talk through maybe starting at the most basic scenario, which would be just something as simple as just a very clear-cut material list where you know exactly what you need. It can be very easily defined. We're going to build a specific it's going to be changing an outlet, build a wall, paint whatever it is. It's a very specific. You know what it costs you,
right?
From a standpoint, you know what you need for product.
Yeah.
And I think it really just comes at that point. If you start at that basis point for anything you do, of just being like, okay, I can break that down to something that I know, and if you use that as a building block for doing more complex things,
sure.
You can't go wrong with that approach, because now you can take it down to an assembly of thing. Okay, I'm going to whatever that specific set of things is. You know exactly what it takes to do that from a labor standpoint. And then what you need to be able to define is saying, okay, what are the things that modify that? What are the modifiers that make that either more complex or less complex?
Sure.
So you could say, let's just take drywall. I think probably most of our audience has a familiarity with like drywall repairs, hanging, finishing, that kind of thing. If you're hanging new drywall over just wood studs, what are the things that could go wrong as a part of doing that? Well, the walls could be out of level, or they could be, where somebody wants a flat wall, and the framing could be an influence over being able to accomplish that. And so you could put a modifier in there and saying that would assume that the walls are flat and there isn't any blocking to be installed. There's no, shimming to be done. It's basically saying, this is the quality of work that needs to be done, assuming this. Right. And then you can say that's the basis point, and then we can modify it from there.
Sure.
And so if you take every assembly like that, I think it's a great starting spot. And it seems like a lot of work.
Well, then it's very clear to know when you actually change order, when you actually get into the
job.
Imagine
you got into a job, and I just had some work done in my house. We were remodeling a bedroom, and they had ceiling drywall done, and there wasn't some blocking on one side. Now, I got a bill from the guy afterwards. It wasn't an estimate up front. He just said, here, he was there for so long, and he billed me.
Yeah.
Okay, whatever.
Yeah.
But if I wanted an estimate, he could say, well, normally we charge $1.68 per square foot. He would have lost money on that job because there's some variables. Now, he could say $1.68 over clean studs. He didn't have to remove any screws that I might have been there from a remodel type job.
Interesting.
He didn't have to float over some sort of irregularity, or he didn't have to put any blocking in, didn't have to cover my carpet. So I think that's the building block of being able to say, okay, then there's the modification to that assembly. And then I think then it just becomes building more of those.
Yeah.
And I think that's kind of the basis for how we suggest people could be very accurate with estimates, is start with the things you know.
And then add the specs, customer-facing specs, to your point of like, hey, here's the assumptions that we're running with, and here's exactly what we're going to do there.
Yeah.
So
and I think that's very hard for us to engage with doing. But once you get into that mode, if you start off with saying, okay, what are the things that are just the most simple part about it? Because, we could take the same task, the same like hanging drywall, and we could think, well, hanging drywall is hanging drywall. I mean, like, what could possibly be different? But then you got to envision those different scenarios of like, okay, you could break it down to say, well, new construction, remodel.
Yeah.
Okay, well, when I'm hanging drywall and remodel, I'm going to upsell or upcharge because there's assumed more difficulties involved with doing that.
Because there always is in remodel.
Exactly.
Is that what you're saying? Yeah.
Yeah. And if it's patching, I'm going to assume a certain like trip fee that I otherwise wouldn't have had, because I got to show up maybe 3 times to do a very small thing.
Yeah.
You can't charge $50 to do a little repair that you have to go back twice to do.
Yeah. You got to cover your costs.
Yeah. I mean,
of running the business, not just the material cost.
Right. Yeah. You made no money.
Right.
Yeah. So I think at its most fundamental sense, estimating becomes down to things that you can understand. As soon as you move outside the realm of things that you understand, you have lots of opportunity for error.
Yeah.
And that's where I've experienced it as well. As soon as I went into the territory of being like, well, I don't know what that should take to do it. You need to get somebody involved that does know.
Yeah.
So is that a subcontractor? Is that somebody that's done this before, that has experience with doing it? We really have no business winging it.
Yeah.
We get burnt a lot.
Right.
If we just throw a number out there. It's very tempting because you have the pressure. You waited the last moment. Back to what we talked about earlier. You procrastinated. You got to the end of it. Like the customer says, I need that tomorrow. They're putting pressure on you, and you're like, okay, I just got to throw a number out there.
Yeah.
And that's where you have opportunity for error.
Yeah. No, I think it's interesting because we've also on other episodes talked about, what's a fair price to charge, and what is the cost of doing business? Yes. What is the cost of materials? Those kinds of things. If you don't know those, then you don't know what's fair, right? Like if you're just throwing out an average number and assuming that it covers all of your costs, like you don't know if your profit margin is 50% on that or 0%, on that. So it's like, well, what's fair in that sense if you don't know what the job actually costs?
Yep.
Like you can actually get a gauge of fairness for jobs and accuracy for building your business from knowing your costs. You have to have the foundation for it.
Yeah, and a cool aspect of how that shifted over time for me and my business. Started off small. We've gone through the story of just having a couple of people. When I went to, I want to build an app, and then I want to know, obviously I grew up around construction, spent a lot of hours doing things, knew something about performing work, but then started a construction business because I want to be familiar with the business process of this.
Right.
And then for me, it went from like, well, you start off with just me, you hire a first person, and as you scale, you get more complexity, more things to manage.
Sure.
And then my whole way of estimating had to change, had to evolve over time. And I think that's with
every hire, with every, purchase, right?
Right. I mean, right. And suddenly it costs more to do things. So I think that's the other thing when we talk about fairness in this whole thing is recognizing what are the variables in my business as well. Because if you want to go buy a truck, you want to buy additional tools, you now suddenly have more overhead and it costs you more to run your business.
Yeah.
And I think that's the kind of the trap as well when you don't have much overhead, is just feeling like, Mom, we're just making profit. We're gouging people. It's like, no, you actually, that truck that you're driving will need to be replaced.
Right.
That set of tools you have will need to be expanded upon. It will need to be maintained and replaced.
Yeah. So either your family's paying for it,
right,
or your business is.
Right.
I mean, that really is the.
Yeah. That truck is not free.
Yeah.
And say it's a cheap, you got a $15,000 pickup truck and it works. There's nothing wrong with it. You got high mileage, whatever else, and somebody else is coming to that job with a brand new F-350 that they're paying $700 a month for, whatever they go for these days. It's probably more than that.
Yeah.
But,
probably is.
$1,200 a month.
I don't know. It's high.
Like $80,000 pickup truck. Their overhead's higher. Somebody's paying for that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Exactly.
So what's fair in all of that, right? I mean, should the customer be paying? Somebody needs to pay for that truck.
Right.
And it shouldn't be you.
Yeah. Yeah. Exactly.
Yeah.
But you better have quality work to cover the cost of it, essentially.
Good point.
Yeah.
Right. It needs to seem fair. And I think that's where we can kind of get lost in all of this, is just trying to poke around into kind of what other people are doing and feel like this almost peer pressure of being like, well, how are you doing it? And then we replicate error as well. I mean, I've had a few times where somebody will show me how they do something and I assume that's the way you should do it.
Right.
And then you find out later, like, how does it even work?
Yeah.
Like, how does it even make money doing that?
Right.
Well, I just, figure my experienced labor should cost $40 an hour, and then I'll add my, you think it has no basis in fact. It's just a feeling.
Yeah.
So feelings, that's maybe another element of estimating too. We can be really good with feelings sometimes, and sometimes we can be horribly wrong.
Yeah. And that's interesting. It's a good point. I like it.
Yeah.
What final thoughts do you have?
Estimating's hard, and I think really going back though to the simplest forms of estimating and trying to keep it to the things that we understand, and if we don't understand it, making sure that we don't bite off more than we can chew in that regard.
Yeah.
And so if we can have an understandable business where we can actually get our estimating down to its fundamental elements of this, we know what it costs, we know what it takes to scale it, we know we've trained people to do it. You have a business you can grow. Yeah. And you have a business you can, not just from adding people, but from a standpoint of revenue, you can set metrics, you can sell that too, right? Yeah. You can go to customers and say, we know what we're, not in an arrogant way, but nonetheless, this is a process we've done many times before. Yeah. And this is the way it works, because there's an educational aspect of estimating that I think we neglect sometimes, where we can treat the customer very disrespectfully and say, well, they wanted something for nothing. But our job is to educate the person too, and say, this is the value proposition we bring, and that's salesmanship. It's really saying, this is the cost, this is why it matters to you, here's what you're buying, and we can educate somebody. And a lot of times we choose more expensive people for projects that we want to have done. Yeah.
Yeah. I think one thing that's interesting in talking to a lot of our customers and just contractors that we connect with is so many people are recreating every estimate versus
Such a good point.
versus building systems or processes to where like, oh, I bid that on this other job. So I have that as a template that I can now like modify. It seems basic, but it's like, again, the whole time thing being sucked and pulled different places, you know, I guess is the struggle with estimating that we've talked about. But trying to figure out a process that eliminates the repeat work and allows you to learn from, you know, the last job you did.
And that's what we call the assembly.
Right.
Essentially, that is the way of breaking it down. If you're a painting contractor, okay, ceilings cost me this, and then you identify modifiers.
Yeah. And assembly is a little bit more of a commercial term.
Yeah.
We've talked about that. But, you know, we're certainly for, you know, the audience who's listening to this might not be as familiar with the term assembly.
Break it down for us.
Well,
we had final thoughts, and then we went off to
we did because I was like, oh man, that's like such
your
a
final
good
thoughts. Yes.
Well, I will break down an assembly, and then you can correct me on what I'm missing. But basically, an assembly being, hey, what is all of the material that goes into, you know, painting a ceiling in your example? What's the labor that goes into that? What is there any equipment rental that you need? Is the ceiling too high? Do you need a lift? Do you need you know, like what is it that you actually need to rent? Building that out to where you actually know, here's my cost per square foot cost for this. And then you can track that and modify it. And it makes it so replicable and to where you don't have to recreate that on every job. And you can actually be like, well, I can stand behind my cost per square foot. And then you just figure out, well, what's my cost of running a business? Make sure that that's accounted for, and then you're off to the races. Yeah, simple. No, but like having the repeatable process for it is like, you know, it's estimating could be a little bit less of a frustration, I guess is what I'm trying to say. If you build it to where it can be reused and just modified, you know, and grow every project.
Shameless plug for our new release is where we've made this process a lot simpler for our audience as well. I mean, this is something that I felt very passionate about, this approach, where you could actually break things down to a fundamental level, understand where you're at, and be able to just, you know, build more of those and make more modifiers and make this more robust over time. But we're just making that a lot easier to do, and I think it becomes more fun too when you understand where you're at. You can sell it, you can learn, you can grow, you can make more money.
Yeah, that's true.
And also really convert customers that otherwise would have never been going for something as expensive when they can see, oh, there's black and white. I mean, it's a fair price because they can see what you're actually charging them for. It's really exciting.
Yeah, for sure. It's a sales tool at that point. So
and you're never in the risky point of losing money. This has been a fun episode in the sense of like we tried to unpack something really complex in a short amount of time, but at its most fundamental level, just try to understand, you know, I mean, really what those things are that you do over and over again and get better at that over time. And there are some things you're going to have to wing. There's some things you're going to you can't solve, but there's a lot of it you can.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, no, that's good.
My final thoughts.
Those are fine. I like it. Well, like it, subscribe, and comment, share it.
Love some feedback on this one.
Yeah, for sure. Let us know what you'd like for us to cover.